Hi, I'm Gael, and in this video I will try to help you decide if the Shikoku Pilgrimage is a trail you should hike. The Shikoku Pilgrimage is a walk connecting 88 Shingon Buddhist temples on the island of Shikoku in Japan. It is a 1200 km loop trail. The starting and finishing point is usually Tokushima, which is easily accessible by bus from Osaka. Tokushima is close to where Temple 1 is, but really you can start and finish wherever you want. The origins of this pilgrimage are a bit blurry, and there is a misconception that it was founded by Kukai, also known as Accomodation, or that Kukai was the first pilgrim. He actually never did this pilgrimage, but he did found the Shingon Buddhist sect and spread it in Japan, and particularly in Shikoku, where you can see statues of him all along the pilgrimage. In 2008, I went for the first time to Japan for 6 months, and that's when I first heard of the Shikoku Pilgrimage. My dream back then was to have the most comprehensive experience of Japan possible over time, and this looked like the coolest thing ever. At this point in my life, I had never been hiking, and what fascinated me was to have an off-the-beaten-track experience of a little explored part of Japan at a slow pace, more that it was driven by a lot of hiking. It was number one on my things to do when I'd go back to Japan, and in 2015, 1 week after completing my first long-distance trail, which was the Te Araroa in New Zealand, I eventually found myself in Tokushima starting the pilgrimage. On this walk, pilgrims traditionally wear a white outfit that you can get from Temple 1. You can also get a nice hat and a wooden stick, though I would not recommend getting the pants because 1, they are white, and the last thing you want on a hike is white pants, and 2, if you hike in spring, you'll be way too hot. With this outfit, locals can identify you as a pilgrim, which can facilitate social interactions. You might even get sometimes osetai, a present that will usually be a drink or a snack, from people you meet. Some pilgrims also choose to buy a pilgrim passport, like the one on the Camino, and having it stamped at every temple. The stamp, called Goshoin, actually being a beautiful hand-brushed calligraphy. I did not do that because it's pretty expensive, between 200 and 500 yen per stamp, and also because it means you have to be at the temple office between 7 AM and 5 PM, which I found restrictive. If the offices are closed after 5 PM, the temples are not, and it's a great time to be there when it's quiet and peaceful. After completing their pilgrimage, most people choose to visit Koyasan, where Kobodachi is buried. It is also the headquarters of the Shingon Buddhist sect. It is a beautiful place, but I don't think I would recommend a temple stay with the monks, which is what a lot of people do there, though I personally didn't do it. I've heard from people who actually trained to be a monk there and they're very disappointed that this is all very business oriented. But Koyasan is still worth the trip because it's a beautiful spot. If you walked one of the Caminos in Europe, keep in mind that this is a very different experience. It is not nearly as social as the Camino is. By that, I mean that if you don't speak Japanese, you might spend a few days or even a few weeks without talking to someone. Also, the accommodation options are much more limited than on a Camino and require a bit more planning. There are pilgrim accommodation options that you can find on the Henro House website. Most of the time, they also offer dinner and breakfast for an extra fee. There are also about 10 temples where you can stay at, but that might not be an easy option logistically if you can speak Japanese. Apparently, there are no official camping spots that are listed on the guidebook, but it wasn't the case when I did it. In 2015, it was very much tolerated to white camp on the pilgrimage, and that's what I did, but my understanding is that the trail has grown in popularity in the last few years, so if you do white camp, remember to do it respectfully, be discreet, and leave no trace. The trail going around an island, you'll see a lot of coastline. You spend a lot of the trail in rural Japan, surrounded by rice fields, but there are also some nice forests, and on occasion, you do go over little mountains. You go through a lot of villages and a few cities, which makes resupplying pretty easy. I think it only happened once that I had to carry more than a day worth of food, though resupplying is mostly done in kombinis, the convenience stores open 24/7. There are very few supermarkets on the way. This pilgrimage is very famous all over Japan, but the crowds don't compare to the ones on the Camino. You do see pilgrims, but when I did it, I only met 3 international hikers, So if like me you can't really speak Japanese, it does limit your interactions. There are also quite a few people doing it on a bike, but the vast majority of people do it on a tour bus, collecting all the stamps in just a few days. Almost everybody walks clockwise, and apparently the marking in the other direction is not as good, which makes it easier to get lost. You can walk this trail in spring or autumn. Summer will be way too hot, believe me, you don't want to do that. I would say that between early April and late May is a good time. And if you start in early April, before your hike, you can spend a few days in Kyoto during Hanami, the cherry blossom time, and that's something you don't want to miss. But you really need to be done before early June, because it's the beginning of rain season and it's just not possible to hike anymore. In autumn, between October and November would be ideal, and then you could visit Kyoto after you hike, right for Momiji-gari, when all the trees change colors. And you definitely want to avoid September, because it's typhoon season. Terrain-wise, it's a pretty easy trail, with ups and downs here and there, but nothing too serious. When I did the trail, I was pretty lucky with the weather, but I met someone who did it at the same period another year, and he got rained on a lot. So it's definitely worth having decent rain gear on this trail, and even in May, it can get really hot and humid. As far as water goes, I remember getting it mostly from konbinis. They always have toilets, and you can get water there. And wherever you are in Japan, there is always a vending machine not very far. The Shikoku Pilgrimage is by no means a wilderness experience. It's a cultural one. Yes, there is a lot of road walking, so if it's something you're absolutely allergic to, that's probably not a trail for you. I try to always look at the big picture when doing a long trail, so if all the other positive aspects counterbalance all the road walking, I don't mind it. But it might not be the case for everybody. In Temple 1, you can buy the guidebook for the trail in English. It has maps and all the information you need. As I mentioned, for accommodation, you can go on the Henro House website. Another good website is henro.co. All the links are in the description. Most countries are allowed to a 90 days tourist visa, which is more than enough. Most people taking about 2 months to do the trail. There is a really nice side trip you can do to Ishizuchi-san. You can also pimp your pilgrimage by adding 20 extra Bangai temples. That would add an extra 200 kilometers to your hike. If you're planning on camping, it is important that you have a freestanding tent. You really want the peace of mind of being able to have your tent set up on tarmac, because that will be often. And cobble camping is not an option, at least in spring, because the mosquitoes will eat you alive. Believe me, I tried. Because there are so many konbinis on the way, I wouldn't bother bringing a stove. At the end of April, beginning of May, there is the Golden Week, which is a week-long national holiday. That means that if you're planning to stay in a city during that time, most accommodation options will be full. You might want to consider bringing an umbrella, because when it rains, it's usually not a drizzle. I'm talking buckets of water, so the umbrella might help a little bit. Be aware that in Japan, on the longest day of the year, the sun goes down very early, between 7 and 7:30 p.m., depending where in the country you are, which means of course that it comes up early, and that if you're camping, you'll be hot in your tent pretty early. In May, the sun rises around 4:45 a.m. and goes down around 7 p.m. In October, it rises around 5:40 a.m. and goes down around 5:45 p.m. And this one's got nothing to do with hiking, but if you're looking for another fantastic Shikoku experience, come back in mid-August during the Awa Odori Matsuri in Tokushima. It's the biggest traditional dance festival in Japan, and it's a lot of fun. In a nutshell, I love the Shikoku Pilgrimage, and it did exceed my expectations. So much so that if I were to hike one long distance trail again, that would be probably this one. I'd like to hike the longer version with the extra 20 temples, and would love to do it on a more comfortable budget where I don't camp every night. But again, don't expect a Camino-like experience just because they're both pilgrimages. They are very different experiences. That's it. I hope you found this video useful. If so, you can help this channel by simply subscribing and like this video. If you have any question, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching and happy trails!